This is Long Phan. He's got a bachelor's, master's, and PhD from MIT. He's the chief executive and technology officer of Boston-based Top Flight Technologies. He has over 20 years' experience in the field of robotics and autonomous systems. At MIT, he was an initial member of the MIT Draper aerial robotics team in 1994 and was part of the first team in the world to demonstrate a fully autonomous helicopter from takeoff to landing in Disney World's Epcot Center in 1996. He's recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on long-wave infrared imaging, mobile wide area sensing, and a bunch of other stuff that some of the words I can't even make out. So our last speaker, and then we'll do questions. Long Phan.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so my history obviously spans over 2 decades. I've worked on drones before they were called drones. They were just called robots back then. And I'm here to give a perspective on the industry side. So I run a company called Top Flight Technologies. We're one of the local companies developing commercial UAVs. What makes our company different from many of the other companies is many of the drones today utilize battery technology, which is very limiting, has a lot of limitations in terms of payload and endurance. Where Top Flight makes a difference is we actually develop micro hybrid engines for these robots or these drones. And by doing that, we've increased the energy density almost by an order of magnitude. So you're looking at drones in the future flying for 2+ hours, as opposed to the typical 10 to 20-minute range that we're getting from drones today. So I think I want to give a little bit of perspective in terms of where are companies like mine viewing the field in terms of the opportunities, the regulation. Where's the demand coming from? Is it coming from the US? Is it coming from international? So how are we navigating as a company? So actually as a company, I'm still a relatively new startup. We've only been in operation for a little over a year. What really kicked off why I got back into the UAV business was Amazon Prime, when they came out with the Amazon drone delivery around that time. That was about 1.5 years ago, I would say. And just before that, a lot of my colleagues saw a huge uptick in drone demand, where they were selling drones, particularly multi-rotor drones, and they were just selling like hotcakes. Like you couldn't get enough of them. And just to give you, I think we threw some numbers on, but anyone heard of that company DJI? Can you imagine how many Phantoms they sell a week? 10,000. And that's before they just came out. That's the number before they came out with the new Phantom 3s that is now even hotter than the Phantom 2. They sell 10,000 drones a week. So in a year, you can imagine it's at least 500,000 of those suckers out there. So I mean, those are really, really big numbers. And so how are companies like mine competing sort of with the DJI and sort of what is our angle, what is our approach? So much of the business, the drone business, and particularly coming from the hobby side, what's really energized is the extremely low cost and availability of these components to make drones fly autonomously. You can literally buy a drone on Amazon for $200 to $500 range, and that was very different from the days that I built them. When I built them, they were like $250,000 per vehicle. So, sort of we're looking at this really disruptive opening, mainly because the price point has gone to a point where it's so cheap to make and sell drones that essentially you would buy them like a toy. Most people who buy and purchase and utilize drones see them as a disposable purchase, sort of like something you would buy like a new phone or a new gadget. So from that perspective, many of the industry are really coming from low-cost components, low-level reliability. Just sort of they want to pump these things out. They want to make and sell lots of them. And then from that perspective, the quality and the reliability is relatively low. And that's why a lot of the problems that we're bringing up, that's why it makes sense, is actually there's not a lot of reliability. Often they'll fly and they'll have what's called a flyaway, or you'll lose control, or some GPS will not work, one problem or another, and then you'll have a problem. And because they're so cheap, they're considered disposable, right? You're not really going to cry if you lose $250. Now, if you lose $250,000, you'll cry, but not on the other end. So companies like mine, we're trying to focus specifically on the commercial industrial market. Our angle is more coming from our experience developing technologies for the DoD, for the military, a lot of the public space. So we take a very scientific approach to developing the technology. So that's where we come in from Top Flight, is we're taking this very scientific approach, where most of the markets coming in is they're coming on the other end. They're taking a very hobby approach, toy approach. And that's how we plan to navigate. So we put a lot of engineering into our work, into development and testing of the technology. We're focused specifically on the commercial industrial market because that's where we see the opportunity. Now, you saw some of the growth numbers. You know, we're talking in the billions. I actually think personally that we're underestimating the market, because most of those projections are based on passive application. Passive are things like taking pictures, taking photos, doing videography, that type of thing. In the future, when you start thinking about active application, things like Amazon Prime delivery is an active application. When FedEx, when UPS, when some of these large players starts doing things like moving goods and services in a major way, those numbers are going to really blow up in a big way. And they are. Those big companies are looking to get into this. So when you start looking at, you know, the top 10 companies in the world utilizing this technology, that's when those numbers will really get big. And so we're not too far from that in terms of, it's not going to be in the next 6 to 12 months, but definitely in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see this big shift for those opportunities. I'm here to sort of give a little perspective. So as a company, which direction are we heading? How are we navigating the regulatory? How are we gonna make these devices, and who are we gonna sell it to? So the way that I'm approaching is actually so there's two markets. There's here in the US, and then there's the rest of the world. So let's first talk about the US. What are the opportunities in the US? Who would be possible customers and users of our technology here in the US? So we're working with essentially two types of groups here in the US that I think in the short to intermediate term. First, those that do not require regulatory approval. So some of the public entities that we talked about, where it's much easier for them to operate, we're working with those groups. And the second is those who can acquire the COAs and the exemptions. So we already work with both of those groups, so we see, at least for Top Flight technology, as that's a viable way. Now, will Top Flight itself file for these exemptions? Most likely not, because we develop the vehicles, we don't operate the vehicles, per se. Now, we'll train, we'll teach, we'll educate what is the safest way to operate the vehicle, but we will not ourselves operate the vehicle in the field. Our customers, our clients, and our partners will do that. And so, you know, that's how I'm going to navigate here in the U.S. Now, internationally, the rules are much more relaxed than here in the U.S. I would say here in the U.S., next maybe in Europe, parts of Europe is also very stringent. But elsewhere around the world, they are very aggressive. I mean, they want, like places like Australia, Amazon and a few other big companies are basically sending their engineering team to Australia. Australia is very friendly. They want drones in the skies. You know, you probably will operate very freely. Also, it's a very sparse country. There's not a lot of population density the way, and risk to the public safety the way it is here in the US. So places like Australia. I'm also seeing big demands in Japan. Japan is huge, right? We know the declining birth rate in Japan. There's a huge demand for drones and robots in Japan, so they're very friendly and very open. Even in spite of the drone landing on the Japanese Prime Minister's residence, I think, with some possibly radioactive material, they're still very they're still very open. Now, you know, it doesn't mean that I'm going to pick a particular market. Obviously, this whole world is changing very rapidly. The variables are changing, the rules are changing, literally on a daily basis. Someone will like the technology one day and completely flip a 180 the next day, right? Like we just mentioned the Japanese Prime Minister, like the very next day there was a backlash. Okay, let's come up with the rules. Let's come up with the regulation. So being a participant in this, like, we have to keep our ears really close to the ground, understand what's happening, find partners who are committed to the long-term vision, find partners who are committed to developing and growing the market and the business, who's willing to stay for long term. We're not looking for short-term partners who are just hit and run in and out, right? Those are not going to be lasting as a business. So I think that's it from my perspective. I'll take questions, but I'd like the questions to be open to the entire audience.
That's great. Thanks, Long.